Okay, so today we're going to look at some of the features in Word that drive people a little bats or that are just not aware. And the general idea is that hopefully these are things that you'll find useful, or at the very least they will spark a thought in your mind of something you want to know more about. And then at that point, just ask, even if it relates to Excel or Outlook or Explorer or anything. So here we have Word then. Okay, the first thing we're going to look at is page setup. Now, the idea of this is we're kind of building up to look at headers, footers, page numbers, all that sort of thing. But if we start with page setup, it's a nice, sensible point to start with. So I've got a blank document here. I think I put some text in it. Now, where's my pointer? Here we go, stick some text in there. So I'm going to use this nice little function that's available in Word. I'm going to have 3 characters per paragraph and 10 paragraphs. There we go, right. So I've now got a dummy document, freshly created. And if I go into layout and then into page setup, now there's a page setup section here. I'm going to make the massive assumption that you can all see the Word screen that I've got on there, because I would imagine, yeah, good, by now someone would have looked at it strangely if they couldn't. But here's a page section. I'm not going to go into this in depth. I'm just going to run through the margins really more than anything. All of these things control important parts of the page setup, or you can just click on the little fly out and it brings up the old style dialog box. This is what I actually want to see right now. Now in here, I can see the margins. There's plenty of ways, well, there's 3 different ways I can think of adjusting the margins in Word. You can either do it from the print preview screen where you drag a margin line into position, or you can do it here where you manually enter the figures, or you can do it using the margins drop down over there, which is, I think, the weirdest option at all for margins. I mean, if we look at that, it's like, do you want normal margins, narrow ones, wide ones? It's like, well, what's a normal margin? It's just bonkers. However, on the flyout, or even if you go to custom, you'll get this old style dialog box, and sometimes it's just the best way of doing it, because if you want a margin at the top that's this big, because you've got a bit of letterhead, then you don't know whether that's normal, wide, or whatever. Whereas if you take out a ruler and measure your letterhead and say, well, I want the margin to start at 3 centimeters and 72 millimeters, then you can go to here and you can type in 3.72. So it just works. So here we've got top, bottom, left and right, pretty self-explanatory really. They default to what's a really weird looking size because it's centimeters. Apparently in ye olden times, 2.54 centimeters was referred to as an inch. And Americans love all that oldie-woldy stuff. So if I wanted to change them, then I could just click through and change them, but I'm not going to. If you're trying to do a document where you don't want any margins, you can change them all to 0, but it won't necessarily work because not all printers can print right to the edge. There's one thing on there which is mildly interesting, which is the gutter. Now, where I try and keep my humour out of. If, for example, you wanted to put any binding on your document, you can use the gutter. Now, they used to call it binding offset, which I thought was a much nicer way of referring to it. But if this was my document, which it clearly isn't, it's a notepad stolen from the Village Hotel. This has a binding offset, as the binding is at the top. And so that's where my gutter would be. If, for example, it was a book, then my gutter would be at the left, and I would have a binding offset at the left. And so basically, when it talks about gutter, it means where is the gutter, in other words, binding, and that can either be top or left, and what should it be? So if you've got a document that is like a book, then you just leave it on the default option left, and then on here you can say, well, I need to add an extra centimetre or an extra 2 centimetres to take into account the binder or whatever it is that is put in, or the folder. I often, what I used to, before I started cutting down on paper usage, I used to put things into a nice little binder when I was doing training courses, and that would be 1 centimetre. And so you'd add that to the left margin, and therefore I'd still have nicely balanced margins even when you open the folder. However, you can just achieve the same thing by increasing the left margin by 1 centimetre. But that's what that's all about, in case you ever find it useful, in case you ever wonder what it is. That's all I'm interested in here. But I'm going to nip through the other screens in case there's anything that you find useful or want to know about. Orientation, it's going to pick up that thing again, the notepad, but it's square, so that won't help. Portrait or landscape. Let me use this bit of paper instead. Portrait or landscape. And so you know which one you want. Normally it's portrait, but that's it's pretty self-explanatory. Multiple pages. Yeah, well, how many pages? Well, we'll come back to that one. We won't worry about that at all, actually. That's going to take a lengthier explanation. You regularly see references to whether you want to apply something to a whole document or whether you want to apply it to a section. In this case, there aren't any sections, so the option isn't available. But you can say this point forward. You can actually have a document which changes margins halfway through, because sometimes that's relevant. Sometimes you might have a front page to your document which is completely different than the rest of the document. So that's what that's about. But again, we'll talk about sections a bit later on. Made up there. Paper's pretty straightforward. You know, A4 generally. However, these people who have big and clever setups where they've got printers that have got continuation sheets in different trays might need to tell it to take the first paper from the top tray where the expensive letterhead stuff is, and take all the other pages from the continuation sheet tray. And so you can do that if you've got multiple trays. If you've got a really complex printer, this screen might appear slightly different. I'm not going to go on about this either unless you want to know more about it. And in layout, there's a couple of options there that are really useful to know about. And they pretty much all happen here in the headers and footers section, which is what we're leading up to. With headers and footers, it's basically the header is the thing that appears at the top, footer is the thing that appears at the bottom. Pretty straightforward. But you don't always want the same headers and footers on every page. So even when I'm doing something pretty straightforward like training notes, the only footer I tend to have on there is the page number. But I don't want that to appear on every page, because the front page is a title document. You know, it's a title page. I don't want page 1 to appear on it or page 0 to appear on it. It would look rubbish. So I would say different first page. The first page doesn't have page numbers, but the rest do. However, and again, this is another page numbering thing, if you're printing both sides of the page, then you might want different odd and even pages for headers and footers. And the reason you do that is, working with my blank bit of paper again. If, for example, this is a sheet, should I do it with A4? No. If I have a binding down there, and then I have my page number here, which would be the nicest looking thing, then that's no good if I print both sides of the paper, because it would mean that there'll be a binding here on the other side, and then the page number will get lost in it. So that's why you'd have different odd and even headers and footers, because in your footer or header, where you put the page number, sometimes you want it on the left, sometimes you want it on the right, if you're printing on both sides of the paper. Does that make any sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah, good. Mm-hmm. All the people are thinking like no, but just say yes anyway to stop me talking. Okay, so that's all about the body offset and the different headers and footer pages or types of thing stuff. Moving on. So the important thing is where the header and footer appear. Now I've set some margins, so I've got plenty of space at the bottom and plenty of space at the top to have a header and a footer, or footer and a header. And in the layout tab, this is where they appear. It's no good saying, oh, the header's got to appear at 1.25 centimetres if you've only got a 2 centimetre top margin, because it'll appear within that margin and you need a bit of space to do clever stuff. It's no good saying, oh, I'll start the header at 0 if your printer can't print on the first line of the paper. because not all printers can. So this has to be a sensible figure. It defaults to 125, which may or may not be sensible. A lot of it depends on the printer and the document. Anyway, so now I've set that, I can say OK, and all that happens is the margins are going to be very slightly different. So that's the page setup screen. On the layout tab, I can either click on the flyout or click on margins and custom, and then here I've got custom margins, and then in layout I've decided where the header and footer is going to go, and if I need to have different headers and footers on different pages, which I shall decide later. Okay, so that's page setup done. Next, headers and footers. Like any nicely logically positioned menu option in Word or Office in general, if I want to insert something into my document, then I would go to the Insert tab on the ribbon. I know no one calls it a ribbon, but that's the correct name for it. On here, I can insert headers and footers and page numbers. Should I do page numbers first? Yeah, I'll do page numbers first. Over here on the right-hand side, we've got page number. There's a little drop down, and it's really straightforward. There's top, bottom options. If I go for top, there's a whole selection of wild, funky formats. Some of them are really plain, which is fine. Some are a bit more interesting. If I scroll through it, there's some really horrendous ones. I mean, who would have that as a page number? That's just madness. Let's get rid of that. Let it go away. Back to the insert, page number, remove, let it go away. So yeah, there are some formats that are quite nice and interesting. But if you just want a page number, the easiest thing is just go for a plain one. You put it at the top, or go to the bottom and put it at the bottom. There's an important option here for formatting page numbers. And what this does is it gives me a choice, or provides us with a choice of different styles, because you don't always just want 1, 2, 3. You might want 1, 2, 3 with hyphens either side of it to make it look mildly more interesting. You might want A, B, C. I can't really see that. That's not going to pan out in a 30-page document. Roman numerals, maybe capital Roman numerals, but either way, whichever method you select, I'm going to stick with the 1, 2, 3. Then you've got some other options. I'm going to skip this bit in the middle for now, but down here is the important bit. Now, there's a couple of choices. You either let it start at the beginning and go to the end, so page 1 has got 1 on it, or you can say start at, and then you can put a start number. Fundamentally, there's 2 ways you can use this. One is to say start at 0 if you don't want a page number, well, if you don't want your first page to be considered page 1, because you might want that to be considered, you might want your first page to be a title document, a title page, and then page 1 is the one that's got the table of contents on it, or page 1 is the first chapter. So you can use it like that, and then in that case, you just put a 0 in there, and then tell it not to print that on the first page. Alternatively, you could just be adding another 30 pages to a really lengthy document that's stored in a different file, and then you'd say, well, start from page whatever, page 272. So it's pretty logical. Now, if you're just starting from number 1 and going to 100 or whatever, then you just leave it on the continue from previous section. But what this will allow you to do is you can put section breaks in and then say, no, I want to start at 1 again. And then if you've got a section break halfway through your document, you can restart the page numbering. If you're not familiar with what a section break is, you'll be excited to hear that all that will change in about 20 minutes. So that's the page numbering. Really, it's pretty straightforward. If you want to insert page numbers, you go to the Insert tab, you go to page number, select whether you want it at the top of the page or the bottom of the page, and then decide whether you want it left, centre or right, or if you want to go for a bold and dynamic style. And then when you've chosen your page style, you've got an option down there to format it. So it's pretty straightforward, really. However, headers and footers, that's much more fun. Now, The purpose of this is to do things like remind people what they're reading. Like when you're reading the book, you might have the chapter name at the top, or you might have the book name at the top and the chapter name down the bottom. In case you're not planning on writing a book, you might use it for things like the date that the document was created. If it's a financial report and every time you change some details and print it out, you want to have the latest information there, or you want people to know they've got the latest information, then of course you can put the date on it. But you can put a code in there so it shows you the date printed, or you can put a code in there so it shows you the date that it was last saved. Or you can even put a revision number in there. And these are all the useful things, because if you're constantly printing out the same document but you're updating it, various people have got various copies, things like the revision numbers are a really handy bit of information to have in there. You can put in a footer that shows you where to find the document. If you're working on a document that a lot of people are likely to print out, whether they're collaborating on it or whether they're just printing a copy because it's the phone list or something, or it's the expense claim form or something like that, it might be handy to have down the bottom where on the server you can find this document. So there's all sorts of reasons why you use it. You might even be really bold and use the header to create a really fancy letterhead, which these days, if you've got a nice printer and you've got nice quality paper, you can print a letterhead that looks as good as anything that you've got from the printers. It just might not work out as cost efficient depending on the amount of ink that gets used. So headers and footers then. I can click on header and say, give me a header, and then just choose something from the list. And as always, there's lots of interesting choices. Or I could just go with a blank one, which seems like a weird choice, but by clicking on blank, what it'll do is it'll give me a placeholder, a marker, an area to start typing. And it even tells me to type here. Yay, thanks guys, I can type there. The useful thing that it does though is on the ribbon at the top here, it has opened the design tab for headers and footers. So I'm going to do a letterhead for blogs and code. There we go. In fact, it's going to be a bold one. It's going to have that instead of the word and. So I can go in and I can do all the usual formatting. Let's I'll do the right mouse click. That's how daring I'm feeling. If I go to font, let's choose a really horrendous looking font for this. Oh, there we go. That's the sort of thing. Blackadder, that'll do. Bold. There we go. It's clearly a firm of accountants. But so there's my header written with the finest quill that I could get hold of. I'm going to centre it as well. Centre that. Can't do it from that menu. That's disappointing. Let's go back to home. There we go. Right. So that's what I've created. I can do all sorts of things with this now. I can go to header and choose different kinds of headers, or just remove that one. That's a bit pointless. I can go to footer and do the same sort of thing. I can put a page number in there, but those are all really straightforward. What I want to look at are these things here on the insert tab. Now, I think I'd like to put a revision number down the bottom of the document. Well, that sounds a bit weird, but I'm going to do that anyway. And to get to the bottom of the document, I can click on this button here. It says go to footer, and that will jump down to the footer. Or I can press this button here to go back up to the header. And that'll toggle between the two locations. That's ideal for people that don't like to have to scroll down. Oh, that's a real burden. But if I say go to footer, it just jumps me right down there, puts the cursor in the right place. And now I can put a footer in there. So I could type in registered office, blah, 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 and all that kind of stuff. But instead, I'm going to mix usages here and do something really irrelevant. So yeah, I could put time and date in there, a bunch of different formats that might look reasonable, but I'm not going to because that's just predictable. I'm going to go to document info instead. Now in here, there's some useful things like the file name. That's not that useful. Delete that. The file name and file path. Oh, cool, it hasn't got a path. I haven't saved it yet. If I had done, it would have a nice long path there detailing what it is. And then I'm going to put revision number below that. Now here, there isn't an option for a revision number. But if I go to document property, there still isn't. Good, that's what I was hoping. See, in document property, there's all the things that you're most likely to use. But if I go to field, there's everything. And it's all kinds of really extreme things like author name, keywords that are stored with the document for searches, all sorts of things. But if I scroll down far enough, somewhere I'll find revnum. There we go. And in here, I can put in the format that I'm looking for. And I'm just going to go traditional numbers. And I can decide how those numbers should be displayed. Let's stick to two decimal places. Anyway, I don't think you can have half a revision. That would make sense. I'm just going to stick with just normal numbers and then say OK. And now what will happen is that code will change every time I save it. The number will go up, and so that's kind of a useful thing. But that's just found on the document info tab. If you can't find the field you're looking for in one of these useful fields here on document properties there, then in field it lists absolutely everything. And you can put these things into the document anywhere you like. You don't have to just save this for headers and footers. So what else have we got then? We've got previous and next. Now at the moment this makes absolutely no sense, but if I click on previous, it will take me to the previous footer. Well, there isn't one. If I click on next, it will take me to the next footer. There isn't one. The reason that it does that is because if I put in section breaks or I put in different first page or different odd and even pages, then I'll have more than one header and footer. And I'm going to do exactly that. I'm going to do different first page. Now, if I go to next, next, right, let me scroll up. Right, this is the first page header. And if I go to next, I haven't got a second page. That's why it won't work. Let me just put a page in here. I can do this for a living. There we go. So back to my header. This is the header and footer that appears on every page. Every page except the first page. The first page is a different one. If I was going to do that, that would make more sense to be on the first one. So if I click on previous whilst in the header box, in here, I'm going to paste that in there now. That's my first page. And then if I scroll down, that's my second page, which got nothing on there. So that is an example of using a letterhead where you might have letterhead on the front page, and then everything else is a continuation sheet. If I was doing page numbers on the second one onwards, I wouldn't have page number there, but I'd have page number down here, which I'm going to put centered. Page number at the bottom of the page in the center, like so. Just managed to overwrite the other footer that I had. Nice one. So that's the kind of use that you might have for different first page. And if I tick this box as well, I'll have different odd and even. And so the even page has nothing there at the moment. And if I click on next, I can see what the next one's like. Get odd and even. And again, I need a bigger document to really get advantage of this. Let me put another page break in there. So back to headers and footers. I can see I've got down here it says first page header and footer, even page header and footer, and then I've got odd page header and footer. And that is pretty much everything you could ever want to know about headers and footers without the risk of snoring starting. But does anybody have any questions on this particular subject? No? Okay, right, I can move on to something less painful now then. So that's page numbers, headers and footers, and I'm going to make them go away. Okay, good. Well, I'm going to leave that there, but I'm not. I'm going to get rid of it all. I'm just going to start a new document, and then we can imagine that never happened. Right, don't save it. Okay, so next thing, sections. Sections should probably come before page breaks. Actually, no, page breaks first. Right. Big document. Gonna have 5 lines in a paragraph, 10 paragraphs. Yay. It still only takes up 1 page. It can only take up 1 page. I'll do that again, then I'm going to do a really big document. Okay. So here's my big document. As you're no doubt familiar, hopefully, you can put page breaks in a document, whether it's big or small. So, for example, if I was getting to the end of some waffle here and I don't really want to start the next page halfway through the paragraph, I could go up to where it says, for example, hold down Control, press Return, and it will start that on the next page. That's your classic page break. That's ideal for things like, I don't know, short paragraphs or contracts where you want to keep sections together. You just put a hard carriage return in there. Put a hard page break in there, and then that will always start that on the next page. If you get to the end of a section and you want to start a new section, again, it's good for that sort of thing. So here you can say, well, that should be on another page. I can just do Control and Return, put it on another page. And even if I have only 1 line on a page, that will still be forced to start on the next page. So that's your classic page break. However, sometimes you don't want page breaks to just be page breaks. Sometimes you want to make pages jump to the next even page. In a minute, page 1. No, next odd page, that's it. Just picturing which side of the paper it would be on. Because if you're using double-sided printing, then if you want the first page of a chapter to have the chapter name and the chapter below it, you want to start on the page you're facing rather than the back of the last one, putting a page break in isn't going to do it. So you need to put in a next odd page break. What's the word for that? There's a much better word for that. And the way we would do that is, rather than going to the Insert tab and selecting Page Break, which is exactly the same as pressing Control and Return, instead you'd go to Layout, and there's a little Breaks tool there. And if I click on the drop down, we've got the page break. We've already found 2 other ways of inserting, but I can go down to Section Breaks and I can say Next Odd Page. Okay, so it seems like a weird one if you're not double-sided printing, or it is a weird one if you're not double-sided printing. But what will happen there, though, is it will just basically throw a blank page if you're otherwise going to be printing on the back of a page, effectively. So, like I say, it seems a little odd if you don't do double-page printing, but for those that do, it's a really useful way of making it appear in the correct manner. So I'm just going to stick some page numbers in so we can see. If only I knew how to put page numbers in. Right, it's bottom of the page, in the centre. Boom. There we go. Oh, that was easy. That's page 1, etc., etc. So if I was printing both sides, I'd see that one first of all. You can get off the footers now, so we've done that. Then I would see this page 2 on the back of it. Let's make this a bit smaller. And then page 3, would be the next one that's facing. Page 4 would be on the back of it. But if I was getting to the end of this page, and that's just like Excel. If you want to zoom in and out, you can hold down Control and use the wheel on your mouse to do it really quickly. But if this was now the next section, and I wanted that to appear on the next forward-facing page, then I could go to Layout, Breaks, and say Insert Odd Page Break. Did I get in front of that? I did, yeah, good. Breaks, Odd Page. Boom. And now that's starting on page 5, as we can see when we scroll down. The next bit. There is no page 4. And the reason there's no page 4 isn't because we can't have a page 4. Sure, we can have a page 4. But the reason there's no page 4 is because there isn't a page 4. But there will be if I start printing it out. So, for example, if I go to Print, here we can see page 1, page 2, page 3, there's what would be page 4, which I can't go to and edit because there's nothing on it. And page 5 is the one that appears on the next sheet. And so if I go back to my document, if I was going to type a load of waffle here at the end of page 3, like so, when I get to the end of it, I'll end up on page 4. Just for anyone that doesn't believe these things. There you go. Ta-da. And still, my next chapter starts on page 5. So that's one of the useful things to be aware of with the page break thing, because frustratingly enough, this should really be on the insert tab, or should also be on the insert tab, or something like that. I'm not sure, but the problem is people go to the insert tab, find break, and go, oh yeah, page break. Well, how do I do that if I want to go to the log page? But that's on a separate section under layout. There's a few other bits on there. There's column breaks. If you're doing columns, now I remember explaining this in detail the other day, but I can't remember whether it was on a webinar or not. So I don't know. If I'm repeating myself, feel free to interrupt. But if I want to do columns, I would do, let's do this on a new document. Like so. I would turn this into columns. Let's say to go to layout, go to columns, and make it 3 columns. Columns are a great way of getting lots more information on the page than you normally would. If you ever wonder why contracts are often, or terms and conditions, or that sort of thing, are often in tiny print and then they're always in little columns, it's not because they're trying to make it harder to read, always, but it's often because there's a lot of white space otherwise. Because if you've got subsection D, section 5G, and a whatever, and it only says like 4 words, and then there's a bit of white space at the end of it. If you put that on an A4 document with just like, you know, on a normal page, you have all this white space wasted at the end of it. If you put it in a tiny little column, you have no white space, and so you can get more stuff into a page by having lots of columns. However, if I wanted to turn my document into columns really quickly, I'd go to layout, I'd say columns. And unless you want to know more about columns, I'm not going to waffle on about this, but I'm just using this to show you how to put a break. If I wanted a break there and said, oh yeah, can I put a page break in, and did control return, it would put a page break in. But like, no, I don't want it to be on the next page, I want it to be in the next column. And so that's another reason why we would go to the layout tab, go to breaks, and say insert column break, and then delete that carriage return. That was a lengthy explanation for a small item, but anyway. Now, if I go back to columns and turn it back into a 1-column document, in other words, a normal document, the other kind of breaks on here that are worth explaining are the section breaks. We've seen odd and even, and we've seen page breaks, but there's 2 other kinds of section breaks. There's next page, which is almost identical to page break, and there's continuous section break, which is almost identical to doing nothing. So for example, if I put a continuous section break there, press the right button to do it, boom, there's a section break. You think, well, that's not really a break, that's just a carriage return. And in fact, I don't even need the carriage return, I can delete that and there'll still be a section break there, which I can't see because I haven't got the markup showing. Let me go to that, there we go. If I press the little backwards P, the show hide button, I can see I've got a section break. Now, what a section break does is it separates between sections. On the screen, this might not mean anything at all. However, I can do things to this bit here, or as it's technically known, this section, and it won't affect the whole page. So I could literally format the top of the page with 1 set of margins, and then down here I could format the bottom of the page with a different set of margins because it's a different section. So there'll come times when you're in a document and you think like, oh, I just need to do this in a different way, but I'm on the same document. Then that's where you do section breaks. And so for example here, if I put a carriage return, actually no, I'll put a section break in there because that'll give me a carriage return. I go to breaks and I go to section breaks and say I'll have a continuous one. Now what's happened there is I've got one section at the top, one section in the middle, and one section below it. In fact, I'll scroll out a little bit so you can see that it's just a regular looking page. But if I click in the middle there, I can do stuff to that. One of the things I could do is I could actually change that into 3 columns. So I could have 3 columns in the middle of my document. We have 1 column at the top, 1 column at the bottom, but 3 in the middle. Madness, but that would be a way that is quite commonly done. Or I could change the indentation, and so the bit in the middle is, let's say it has a massive left indent, 5 centimeters, that's fairly massive. And you can see because it's just that section, and I feel like it really needs to have a right indent as well if I'm going to do that. There you go. Oh no, that just looks awful. Stop, make it go away. That's a 1 centimeter, yeah. So I could have that section just indented. Because it's a section, it keeps it separate from everything else. So it might be that you want to do something clever, and then the only way you can do it is by using section breaks. Or it might be that you're working with someone else's document and you can see all these section breaks but can't understand why they put them in there. But that's what section breaks are all about. And if you want to see them, you can click on the Home tab and the little backwards P, and you can see where those breaks occur. Like so. That looks really messy. That's a paragraph break by that one. If I delete that paragraph, then it'll end up with exactly the same formatting. Yeah. Anyway, section breaks. Sometimes you want to start the new section on the next page, and that's where on the Layout tab you would go to Breaks and select Next Page right there in front of me. Anyway, if you want to know more about that, feel free to ask. If not, I shall just go on to the next bit. So that covered page breaks and sections, and the last thing I've got on my list to make sure I don't forget is watermarks, because they're fun. Yeah, good. So, anybody use watermarks?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, good. In other words, yes, I know how to do them already. Okay, I'll cover them anyway, just because I can. Let me first get rid of everything on this page. Control A, the most useful thing, Control A, delete. And let's turn off that P and create another document. Undo. Watermarks are really handy just because sometimes you need people to be aware of stuff. If I go to design, trying to remember where it was then. On the right hand side, there's a thing there for watermarks. There's also a thing for colour. You can change the page colour. For example, if I wanted to have a yellow page, or maybe a sepia kind of orange page, I can do that. And that's got to be the maddest use of toner ever, to say like, yeah, I want to have a complete solid colour page for my background. Anyway, I'm not going to do that because that would be mad. However, I'm going to watermarks, and there's a load of, I say a load, there's a couple of examples here, the worst possible examples. I imagine by choosing confidential as your watermark, that would encourage somebody to read it. If you wanted to get the message round of something that no one ever normally reads, put confidential on it and then they'll look at it. I can't imagine anyone in the history of time ever seeing the word confidential there. They're thinking, oh, I mustn't read this. Do not copy is just like saying, go straight to the photocopier. The one that's useful in my mind is not confidential or do not copy, but it would be something more along the lines of this. If I had a custom watermark, and then where it says text, if I click that and change it, or ASAP, quite an aggressive I'm having there, change it to draft. I think that's the most useful, because by putting that in there, you can see in the background, draft written across it, then people will know that they should close the door when they finish printing. No, they'll know that, that this isn't the finished document. But if I go to File and Print, yeah, there's a watermark that says draft. It's just handy to convey that message, because that way you haven't got to screw up your document to kind of convey the fact that it's not complete yet. And you can go to watermark, and you can go back into custom watermark and then say no watermark or change it to something else. Well, there's an easy way of getting rid of it. You can just go to custom watermark and say remove, and then it's gone. But if I go back into custom though, there are a few other options. I mean, yeah, you can change the language. Not that's going to make a lot of difference. It will just show up as a spelling mistake if you've got it in a word that's not in the dictionary. You can change the font, but the size is really handy to have it set to auto, because that just means that it will make it as big as will fit. Diagonal and horizontal, yeah, you can go either way with that, but horizontal doesn't really convey it quite so cool a manner. But you can change the colour of it, so I suppose you could do it yellow or something. I don't know what would be appropriate. You've got the usual 16.8 million colours to choose from if you're feeling really bold, but just having it in grey normally does the trick. And choosing semi-transparent, which is one of those words that makes no sense whatsoever. It's either transparent or it isn't. But semi-transparent, yeah. So that's the standard stuff. Or if you want to do something a little bit more daring, you can go for a watermark that is a picture. So if I choose picture, I can leave the scaling set to auto, and again, just like the text, it will make it as big as it can get away with. And I can leave this set to washout, which with a picture, again, if it's a watermark, you don't want it to be a vivid image because that will detract from the document. You just want a blurry picture. And the way you normally do that is you turn the contrast up to 85% and the brightness down to 15, I think. But there's a button for it on there, which is much easier. So if I go to select picture and then go to picture from file, and then choose from my wide variety of training images, then here I've got a nice little Mexican chicken. If I insert that, then here we have the Piri Piri watermark. There he is. I love it. It's nicely washed out so that it doesn't get in the way of the text. And if I go to file and print, there is my Piri Piri Word document. So yeah, there's not a lot more to say about that, unless you can think of something mildly complex to improve it with. If I click on remove, he's gone.
I've got a question, Glenn.
Yes.
I use the watermark for duplicate because I have to send a duplicate thing sometimes, and I put it in manually each time. But I did notice as you were going through that I might be able to save one which says duplicate to reuse easier.
Yeah.
What's that save selection to watermark gallery?
Yeah, let's do that. Let's change that to duplicate. Not looking any good. Yeah, that'll do. Okay. Now, save selection. Now I'll click on that like I really mean it. Okay.
Oh, I picked a complicated question.
Yeah. Right, custom watermark. Gosh, yeah, I can't see where you'd save it. Oh, well, I can see where you'd save it. I can't see how you get the pesky thing available. Save. Oh, that's going to have to be one for. You have to come back to the answer to that. You have to find out. That's going to take some serious clicking. Yeah, that's weird. Because then what you'd do is you'd have it.
It'd be quicker, wouldn't it, if it was up there? Yeah.
Yeah, a lot easier. Yeah. So that is very strange. Let me just try something. No. Yes. Oh, actually. Hang on a minute. Okay, so you've got to have something selected. Nice to have learned with the tutor moment. If I select new buttons and say save that to the watermark gallery and call it new buttons, then there it is, new buttons. No, I'm going to have to find out how to do this properly.
Okay.
That might, yeah, that might be close, but it's not what we want. I'm sure it's really simple, but it will just be a case of, selecting the right kind of text in the right way and then clicking on that save. But I'll find out. Okay.
Thank you.
Good. Yeah, that was a good question. That's something to find out about. Okay, does anybody have any questions about anything else? That sounds like a no then. Let me right, good. Okay. In that case then, I reckon that'll be about it. Tomorrow, that's what I was looking at there for. Tomorrow, it's more Excel stuff. Yeah, good. We're going to do some cool stuff actually. Working with dates, that's a really important thing in Excel because a lot of people make a lot of mistakes when it comes to the use of date-orientated functions, but also daft stuff like rounding numbers and anything that's financial, where you've got pence involved. It's always good to know how the rounding works. So we'll go through a lot of that tomorrow. And any other questions that you might come up with, regardless how simple or how difficult. So feel free to email me requests or work out some questions in advance. But yeah, this time tomorrow we shall have a wacky day of Microsoft Excel.